So is it not projected that they can't see?
Pardon me?
I don't see it on the screen, so they're not able to see what I'm.
No, they will see it. When you started, ganz kurze Frage, wo ist das Team? Wenn Aida die startet, dann wird das, okay, when you start, the screen will be shared for the people who are online.
What about
they
them?
They see it here.
Okay.
Ja? Okay, sagt ihr, wenn wir anfangen können? Okay. Okay, so welcome to our third day of Hamburg Portfolio Review today. We are very pleased to have Aida Muluni here today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And Aida is a Canon ambassador, a Ethiopian artist, role model, photographer, and yeah, we are very, very happy to have you here and looking forward to your show. And afterwards, we will have some time for questions. So thank you very much. You have your micro there.
Okay. So I can start? So thank you everybody for being here today. I'm very happy to be here in Hamburg for the Hamburg Portfolio Review. I've had a very intense schedule of traveling, and through that travel, this is a presentation that I've given in the past, and after spending some time in different countries in Europe, I think, this is really a presentation for the young photographers. I spent some time reviewing photographers from the Canon student program, And the key thing for me is just to give you an oversight of how I started. I think often people think that I'm only a fine art photographer, but I actually started in photojournalism. And what I teach in Africa is really based on, the foundation of creating a narrative comes through, how we tell a story through a collection of images. So my story actually began when I went back to Ethiopia the first time, and having grown up abroad and spending so much time, really contemplating on the image of my country. Often in the media, when we talk about Ethiopia, when we see the visual, what comes out of Ethiopia, it always been a one-sided story. So my entry into photography first was really to advocate for my country and to show the complexities of where I come from, that it's not just, one type of image, but there's a lot of stories within Ethiopia. And through that, I've had really great mentors who have really guided me through my career. And the key thing that I've understood has been, how do I portray my people? How do I tell stories? And really, how do I share with the world, what is the image of Ethiopia and Africa? So in my first return to Ethiopia in 2002, I spent a few months there, and having left Ethiopia at the age of 5, it was a way for me to sort of learn about my people again. So since I don't have any family album of my existence within Addis Ababa, it was a way for me to also really be able to capture a memory of Ethiopia that, in a sense, I'm creating my own memories within it. And in the beginning, I'm a photographer who started in analog. So, for example, these images is, images that I have taken with, film. And the key thing to me has always been, how do I capture moments? How do I capture sort of a different slice of, the daily life within Addis Ababa? And at this time, I was working at the Washington Post, so I came back with 40 rolls of film. And basically, the big challenge for, when you're a young photographer is how do you edit your work? So my whole mission has been really, how do I navigate in the market? And then how do I maintain, and this is something that I've said to all the young photographers, how do you maintain an authentic voice within your own work? And how do you stay true to what is your mission and what is your objective? Because often I think the industry and these different portals try to make photographers navigate into an existence that is not true to themselves. So shooting in black and white, my first passion is that, and I've always gravitated towards it. So it was really a way for me to just focus on, the different layers within an image and not have the distraction of color. So sometimes, some editors will say, well, there's too many black and white photos, or how come there's no color? But this is what I felt passionate about. And it wasn't until I met Chester Higgins, who used to be a photographer, staff photographer at New York Times, and he had a book that really had a big impact on me, that I realized, okay, shooting in black and white is not a crime. It's sort of my visual language and my visual approach. So after that, I came back to Ethiopia in 2007, and it was really a way again to reconnect. And the key thing for me was I spent about 2 months on the road traveling, around Ethiopia, and to have a better understanding of who my people are, and also again, how do I represent, who we are, as a community, who we are as a culture. And for that, it was also this transition of going, shooting in my country now from an analog into a digital existence. And I know when digital first came about, it was a very challenging thing to shift your mindset, because when you have a roll of film in your camera, how you process your mind and how you process the image is very different from this digital existence. And again, went back to black and white, and then basically, came back into color. And through these different interactions that I've had, the one thing that I've always taught is that you have to build a connection with the people that you are photographing. So for example, in this image, we walked into a small cafe in the middle of nowhere, and they knew I had a camera. I waited, and I think the big thing for photographers is how do we become invisible in a space, and how do we capture the natural moments of whomever that we're trying to portray. but through it, color has always been a big challenge for me. And I don't know, I see things in black and white still. So for me, it's really, moving towards color photography has always, unless it's screaming color, I don't see it. So I realized that a lot of my work for my journalistic work was just being attracted by specific colors that just kept appearing. And it was really much later on that I realized that all these experiences that I had in journalism really had an impact within the fine art realm. So when we talk about a visual narrative, and I know currently in the industry, there's a big conversation about what is photography. There's a big conversation about the validity of photography as it relates to, photojournalism or fine art. And my approach has been is that I don't believe in the elitism of photography. I believe that if you can effectively communicate what is in your heart, and if you can effectively communicate what is important to you, you can still say the same things, and the same messages that you can transmit. So when I started this journey, it was actually through Simone Jami, who is a curator based out of Paris, Cameroonian background. And he commissioned different artists from across Africa to have an interpretation on Dante's Divine Comedies. And at that time, I was trying to figure out, should I go back into my black and white journalism to express this old, text, or should I, basically try to find a new form of expressing myself? And this was really the beginning for me. And I made 7 pieces for this work. And it was a way for me to express, because my section was Inferno. So when you look at the Divine Comedies, it's, you have Paradise, Purgatory, and Inferno. So I wanted to show what was Inferno to me. And through that, it was really a big challenge on making a body of work that really expressed what was within me. And the one thing that I realized is that I drew a lot of inspiration from all the work I was doing across Ethiopia. I was doing assignments for the UN. I was seeing the different challenges of my community. But I came to a point where I knew photojournalism was just not enough to express what I wanted to say. So I decided, okay, let me go into this form. And I think for a lot of young photographers, I think often there's always a danger of sort of jumping into finding style before you actually go through the process of understanding, how do you construct a set of images. So for me, this is why photojournalism was quite important, because that helped me transition into the fine art, and it sort of added layers for me as it relates to what is that I'm trying to say within it. So I've always believed that, when we talk about a visual narrative and, transmitting a message, I've said often, I'm not here to offer answers for Africa. I'm here to really ask questions. So for example, for this piece, this was a dedication to the football player Danny Alves. And I don't know if you've ever seen, he was coming out to the football field and they threw a banana at him and he picked it up and ate it. And I thought this was such a fascinating way to process racism in Europe. And within that, then I started thinking how, when you really look at sort of how certain symbols and certain fruits have been attached to racism, to me, it's still, in this day and age, we're still having this conversation. So through these different collections that I have built over the years, again, every frame that I create, everything that is in the image is really a reflection of what I've experienced, the things that I've encountered, or the questions that I'm raising as it relates to myself as an African, as a diaspora, as a female. All these components exist. And also there is a political history to sort of my movements globally, because I've traveled a lot in my lifetime. And again, it's a question of sort of raising certain issues. And for me, it was never it was never having a conversation about identity, but it was really having a conversation about some of the challenges that we face in the continent. So, for example, this image, which is titled "The Return of a Departure," this was really looking at, a lot of the Africans that are dying in the ocean, trying to cross over into Europe. And this kind of reminded me about the slave trade, of the number of Africans that died really trying to, being taken from West Africa into the Americas. So again, it's always adding layers to the work, but at the same time, the work that I do, there's a lot of symbolism. And I always say, the work that I create is really for my people first, so that they have sort of a sense of the conversation I'm having. And then the rest for the international audience is to have sort of an insight of just the complexities of the different visual languaging that exists within Africa. And in that sense, it wasn't just only looking at, having conversations only in Africa, because I believe that when we look at the global South, we share similar issues. There's a lot of things that connects us. And even when you look at the development of photography in the global South, we do share a commonality as it relates to what are we able to document in our countries, what are we able to express through photography. So right now, when you look at sort of the rise of photography coming out of Africa, there's a lot of fine art photography because we have challenges of trying to capture the reality on the ground. And for that, we resort into other forms in order for us to be able to tell the same story that any journalist would say about our country. And through that, for me, I realized that the tool of photography is really, how do we advocate for something very specific? So currently, for example, there's a show at the Tate that I'm a part of called A World in Common, and it kind of gives you the spectrum of photography from across the continent, and it gives you a spectrum of the different, not only interpretations, but the different approach of how we're using photography to disseminate specific information to the global market that is not based on the cliche images that we always see as it relates to Africa. And this is why, I think today and in this time period, as opposed to when I started, now there's actually more photographers from the continent, because editors understand that, to try to get the authentic story, you need to find the photographers on the ground. And many of us are really working in Africa to teach. I run a festival, we do different portfolio reviews because we need also our own storyteller. So it's a very ironic situation for me when, the reality of one country is only documented through the foreign gaze. It's the same thing as, for example, Germany is only photographed by Ethiopian photographers. That sounds ironic when we think about it, in the other way around. So in that sense, it's quite important for us to create these images. It's important for us to make these specific statements, because at the end, I feel that the role of photography and the role of photographers is that we are the witnesses of the present time. And the one thing that I teach is that we're not only witnesses, but we are the archivists of that specific time in our history. So when you look at photojournalism across Africa, we have a lot of holes because there weren't photographers on the ground that really documented these changing times and the changing history of the different countries. And this is really one of the reasons that for me, when we talk about the advocacy component, it's not just about my work, but it's about really developing capacity on the ground and getting other photographers to learn the skills and to really enter into the international market, because through that perspective, then we have different views on one place. So it's not just my view, it's not just the foreign gaze, but the more photographers that we develop, then the more interesting sort of visual aesthetics that are coming through that. And then for the foreign audience, they understand, okay, Africa has many, many perspectives. There's, many ways to tell a history of a place. So as it relates to advocacy, my first commission actually that I did was with WaterAid and the H&M Foundation. And I remember when they came to me, this was really talking about water security and its impact on the development of society. And I told them, like, I'm not really, I've done a lot of NGO work, but I told them I wasn't really interested in doing the typical image of, the kid at the water well with the, pumping the water, or, somebody carrying a bucket of water. Like, I was interested in doing my own artistic interpretation through that. And often, people ask me like how I start the work, and everything I do actually starts on a piece of paper. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it. I write a lot, I sketch things out to just help me process. And through each work, it's also about the construction of the set. So for me, when we speak about, how do I come up with these images and what have you, everything that you see, it's the existence between an actual live location and also the creation of, a whole set. So in a way, I'm processing everything almost, my degree is actually in cinema and not photography. So I realized over time, what I'm really looking at is, how do I create my own universe? But within that universe, how do I tell a very specific story that is really something that's coming from what I have seen with my own eyes? So you have to remember, like, having traveled, throughout Ethiopia, and seeing also the different challenges of our women and what they go through in order to access water. This really became an influencing factor of, like, how do I construct each piece and what am I trying to say? And one of the most common things in Africa is this yellow jerry can, and this is what you would see. So if you're driving on the highways, you just see this long line of women just carrying, this yellow jerry can, trying to, walking for, 2 to 3 hours just to get water back into the home. And every project that I have done and that I've been commissioned for, it's research is such an important component in photography. And this is one thing that I always say, is that you have to research everything, because through these experiences, I learn a lot of different things. And the one thing that I've learned really through this is that I never knew the correlation between access to water and the development of really how our women progressed forward. So, for example, if you look back to this image, this was really talking about, menstruation. So, for example, when young girls are menstruating, they're not able to go to the school because there's no access to water at the school. So they end up staying at home, and that has an impact on them being able to advance in their education. And if they're not able to advance in their education, then it's basically just a vicious cycle that they go back and forth. So within this, I mean, there's a lot of symbols. So for example, the moon being there based on the cycle. And when you look at even this terrain, it's actually a real terrain. I shot this in the northeast part of Ethiopia called the Danakil Depression in the Afar region, which is the hottest place on earth. And to me, I wanted to also experience really what it meant to be in a place where there's no water. So here, for example, there's a small community that lives in this very harsh climate in order to sort of, because there's a lot of tourists that come there. And when I see that, it's, when you experience it on the actual location, I feel that it inspires the work in a different way. And so through that, my work really focuses on specific colors. I know people are always asking why these colors, and it comes back, and I say this before, it comes back to me not being comfortable with color. So I said, let me just focus on primary colors, because this is what I can process for myself. And a lot of the clothing, I do a lot of research looking at archive images of Ethiopia from turn of the century. And so I just basically get inspired by that. And then the face paintings is really a way for me to bring my country and Africa into the conversation. Because when you look at across Africa and the global south, the component of, face painting, body scarification, tattooing, this is almost like in the tradition for me, it's a very contemporary act, because in a sense, the community is using their body as a form of expression and as a form of really connecting with their identity and their culture. So through this approach, I really, I realized that, there is a way that you can make a bold statement and say the same things, because we're really living in a time where we have a lot of access to images. When you look at Instagram, you look at your phone, I think this is probably a moment in our history where we're consuming a lot. But within that, I think we become numb in a sense, because right now we look at all the wars happening, all the different catastrophes and what have you, and that being pushed by the international media. At some point, I think the audience becomes desensitized. So for me, it's how do I use my visual aesthetics to bring the audience into the topic, and also for them to be more curious. So when I was commissioned by the Nobel Peace Prize, this was the year for the World Food Program, which was looking at how food is used as a tool for war. And I decided, okay, I'm gonna pick countries that I felt connected to, and countries that I had actual experience in, or countries that I was curious about. So for example, for this, to me, was just a representation of Yemen. I spent part of my childhood in Sana'a. So thinking about where Sana'a is now and what I know of Sana'a, it's two different realities. And when we look at some of the challenges, especially that comes through war, a lot of it is really women and children are the ones that are impacted, heavily. So through that, all the different countries that I selected was really for me sort of to provoke sort of a different sense. So for example, in this image, this was for Namibia, and I didn't know that as it relates to Namibia, sort of the German influence that had happened as it relates to what happened to the Namibian people. Most people don't know this as part of history. And to me, it's again, going into the research, I thought it was quite fascinating, and how, those that were against the Germans were basically sent out into the desert. And the only way, it's either they die in the desert or they come back and get killed. So I just imagine as a mother, just some of the thinking that comes about it, to either choose a quick death or a slow death. And I don't know if any of you have seen the landscape of Namibia. It's quite beautiful. You have this sort of desert landscape, and then you have the ocean, and then you see sort of these dried trees. So I try to incorporate that element within it. And then again, when you look at the clothing that the women are wearing, this actually comes from the traditional wear of the women, but I just reinterpreted it in my own way. And in actuality, everything we built, there's an actual canvas. So I work with artists, they paint for me my canvases. I have a large canvas of about 3 meter by 3 meter. And it's a way for me also, it gives me a reference point. And within Photoshop, we go in and we clean up the image. And I realized that when we build these sets, it gives a different aesthetics to how I see the image, but also at the same time, the audience also reads into it, something very specific. So, it's between the live location, excuse me, between the live location and also building the sets. Again, it's just to try to maintain not only my aesthetics, but also my messaging. And within that, the color plays its part. And within that, it's also coded in a very specific way that for an Ethiopian, they will recognize very specific things in the work. I hope I'm not going too fast, and it's okay. So the next work that I did, this was for the End Fund. And again, I only work on projects that I'm curious about. I work on things that I feel passionate about and the things that I find to be relevant. So for example, during COVID time, there was a big issue in Africa that a lot of the funding that needed to go towards, neglected tropical disease was pulled out, and a lot of the funding went into COVID. And I found that to be very peculiar because COVID was not what was killing us. It was actually all these other diseases. And so when NFUND approached me again, and you have to remember, for all these commissions, everything that I present, it's a very precise approach. So what I sketch is normally what ends up coming out on the frame. There's only moments where what I sketch, sometimes we'll spend all this time of sketching, setting up, and what have you, and then I realize, oh my God, this is a horrible image. So we have to go back into restructuring it. So the way that I function is to keep things as organized as possible, and through that, it gives me an opportunity not to panic when I'm about ready to shoot, that it actually calms me down. And then all I'm doing for is really looking for that specific magic moment. And that's what really photography is about. It's about finding that magic moment. For me, I don't care if you're doing studio work, if you're on the streets, even if you're shooting food photography, it's always trying to find, that specific image that it says something to you. And also by that saying something to you, that it says something to the onlooker. So in this case, for the End Fund, what I focused on was really the human impact, because rarely when we talk about disease in Africa, it's a more of a scientific approach as opposed to really understanding the human implications of it. So in this image, for me, most of us that live in major cities in Africa, we see a lot of diseases that have been eradicated in the Western world, but are still on the streets. So when you look at elephantitis or you look at polio, all these things still exist. And as a community, living there, at some point you kind of turn a blind eye. You don't see these things, even though it's something that could be simply eradicated. So for me, it was just sort of a double meaning that we're turning a blind eye. But also when you look at diseases like river blindness, which just comes from a fly, which can be resolved with a pill. but it ends up becoming something much more severe. And a lot of that that I learned really was when we look at the culture within our continent, is that, and I thought this was super fascinating, is that we exist really between traditional medicine and Western medicine. So for example, in Africa, there's a heavy belief in our traditional medicines. And even for the scientists working in the continent, they have to really process that. And what ends up happening is you have to sort of have an understanding that traditional medicine is really for your spirit and the Western medicine is for your physical. And I didn't really process that. And through this project, again, these were the things that I learned. And I realized, wow, this is super fascinating. So again, it was really to incorporate the traditional element or the spiritual aspect and to have a different conversation as it relates to, who we are as a people and how, um, I think for the Western world and for Europe to understand that we come from these heavy traditions and heavy culture, that it's not about, coming in and trying to save, it's to understand, what's actually on the ground and to try to understand who we are as a people first and also how we navigate through our communities. And most of it for me over the years that I've realized is that a lot of the challenges that we have in our continent, and especially when we look at health, it comes back to information and education. So this piece was really to speak about, without proper education and without proper dissemination of information, simple things like, for example, I remember we did a campaign on hand washing, why hand washing was important. For those living in Europe and in the West, hand washing is just an integral part of, just your day to day. But if you don't have access to clean water, if you don't understand how the things are transmitted, this all comes back to information. So, and that starts at the education level. So, for example, most people don't know this, but when you look at certain campaigns, just by having a poster in these rural schools on specific diseases or specific issues has such a huge impact because it is actually the children that go back to their family and transmit that information over. So this is why I've been very big on education, because I've always felt that in order to change Africa, we really need to be part of education and reforming our education system. And through that, it's also understanding that the science aspect of it, and that's the thing, like within disease, there's a lot of doctors from Africa working intensively on this topic. It's not just outside doctors coming in, but through that, how do I express these things? How do I share this information? But then at the same time, how do I use the tool that I've been given in order to express something that has different levels within it, but also it's a way to provoke the international audience also to see, okay, we're not only telling stories through one form, but we're telling stories through different approaches. And I think currently where we stand and even talking to different photographers from around the world, I understand that this is sort of the urgency for a lot of the young photographers. It's how to remain authentic, how to be able to tell a story that means something as it relates to this present time, and how do you have an influence for the future, and how do you change the future. So from my end, I exist between making my work, but also teaching and running a festival, because this is all part and parcel of how do we move the industry forward. And as Africans, how do we engage and enter the international market? And within that, how do we create our own authentic voice? And how do we maintain an aesthetic that's truly ours? And within that, how do we also navigate a very difficult market that, for the day to day, it has its own challenges within it. And to leave you off, somebody asked me what was a good photograph. This is what I believe in. And this is a statement from Irving Penn. So to me, again, we are in visual communication, regardless of what form that you're using. And visual communication for me means that whoever is looking on, did they get something from it? So for example, for me, the reason I make the work that I make, it's really, I don't believe in this excessive academia in photography. I think that if, whoever is looking at it, regardless of your location, regardless of your class, regardless of who you are, you have to be able to take something away. And that's when you know that you've done an effective job of, making someone think about what they just saw. And I think in our industry, and even when we look at the fine art world, sometimes it's above my head and I don't understand what the purpose of it is, but to me, it's not about creating work for, the galleries or creating work for a specific level of class of people, but I think the role that we play is we need to address all the community and be able to create art that not only reflects us, but also engages the audience, regardless of who they are. And I believe that that is how being effective and, being a true artist is, being able to create connections with the onlooker within that. So that is my presentation. So thank you. Okay for time?
Thank you so much. I'm full of respect about your work, and I have, maybe I'm asking you first if you have any questions. So otherwise, I'm taking the first question. Oh no, Andreas, please.
Thanks. Hi, Ida. Impressive work, really. When you see where you start and then where you move to now in the fine arts, I would like to know how much of your work, of each picture or some pictures, are photographed and how much is later on Photoshop and work post-production on it.
So everything is a photograph. So all the pieces are photographed, and then it's basically either creating a collage or a matter of cleaning things up. So for me, I remember in the beginning, we were photoshopping in backgrounds that was not photographed, and sort of the feeling of it was just not there, So all the objects that you see or any strange placements or what have you, those are all images that have been taken, and then they're brought back in and basically laid out. And you have to understand in this process, the sketch starts, then we go to the set, we shoot the set, and then when we go into editing, sometimes, for example, this image was not in the, I don't know if you can see it. Okay. So when you look at this image, this is not what I had envisioned. It just, during the shooting, I just couldn't find the image that I wanted. So I said, okay, let's shoot all the components. And so in actually the editing part, sometimes a whole other image comes about, and then that's when I realized, okay, this has been finalized, and then we can move on. But often, I think it's, I'm using Photoshop, as they say, it's like the salt in the stew. So it shouldn't be the whole thing, but I believe that every image, for example, technically we finish in the camera. So for example, my settings are always f11. This is always so the technical part, we have to have it down. And then the rest is just basically how we're compiling the image and how we're constructing it, and to keep myself sort of open, because you never know, there's another layer of inspiration that comes in the editing process.
Thank you. I have a question, because you were talking about your role as a teacher, as a festival leader, as an artist, and I think that's very impressive and also very important to bring all these pieces together to form also the younger generation. And my question is, what does the young generation, what are their questions or what are their targets? Can you tell us a little bit about their ideas or hopes?
No, I think for a lot of the young photographers, they're entering into a very difficult period in photography because there's more competition and there's less money, I believe. And I think one of the concerns is how to make work that actually means something, or how to make work that stands out. And I believe that the market is shifting dramatically. And this is why, like, I think that when we talk about the role of photography, it has so many perspectives within it. So I remember there was a South African photographer who was doing commercial work, but then he existed within fine art world. And he felt so guilty for doing commercial work. And I told him why. Because for him, he felt that he wasn't being authentic. And I said, well, you have to pay your rent, and you have to feed yourself. So until you find a way to make the money within your fine art, there's nothing wrong with doing different styles of photography. But this, I feel, is the failure of our education system. And I think the market has moved quite dramatically, but the educational excuse me, the educational component has not addressed, this shifting aspect of it. And I think for a lot of the young photographers is to understand, how do they promote themselves and how do they enter into the field. And I think, having like financial literacy, understanding how to market yourself, these have to be really embedded within the educational component of how to make yourself competitive. And I think for a lot of the photographers, this is what they're trying to figure out. And even for a lot of the world competitions, sometimes there's a danger in that, because then young people think, okay, this type of work won, so I need to submit this type of work. But it's not about that, and this is why I think the power in the youth is there to really shift the market and shift the industry fully.
Any more questions here from the audience? I see Sebastian H. Schröder sitting there. He will be the moderator of our panel, and it's about artificial intelligence and the ethics of arts and photography. So what is your approach with artificial intelligence, or do you have one?
No, I mean, I think AI is a new contender in the market, and I think it's something that we have to accept. And again, it goes back to this Puritan idea of what is the image. And I remember, the shift from analog to digital, there was a big issue with that. And now you have AI as well. But it means that, we have to sort of navigate through that, because at the end, it's a form of an expression that we have to contend to. And, the Pandora box has been opened. There's no closing it back in. And it means that, okay, now we have to address sort of how do we exist within all these different realms. And I think for AI, and I was even telling Sebastian, I mean, it's a revolution within the image industry, just as, when you look at the printing press, transitioning over, these are components that it's always moving the industry forward. But in the end, also, I think eventually there has to be a point of regulation. If you're using AI as a form of fine art expression, I mean, we know when we see an AI image, but I believe that, we're in a world, for example, where, the vinyl record is something that's ancient and, very old, but there's people still collecting vinyl records because they find a value within that. So I think we have to process this and we have to have a better understanding of it. The only danger for me is, AI being used to duplicate sort of realities that don't exist. So I think that's the big issue. But as an art form, it's like, we're just changing the paintbrush, we're going through another approach. But in the end, it's going to become a thing of, eventually when all this sort of big conversation is happening, at the end, it's going to be like, okay, is what created, does it mean something? Does it have any value in it? And you have to remember when the whole NFT hype came in, I remember in Africa, everybody was doing NFT. But in the end, it's like, if it doesn't have any value within it, and not financial value, but what are you trying to say with it? It ends up sort of fizzling out. So I know that there's a lot of different graphics guys in Africa that are doing AI, and again, it's just another form of expression. That's how I see it.
You also mentioned the need to regulate it. Okay, if there is, there's another question.
Thank you so much for your presentation so far. I kind of want to circle back to what you said about like global South, global North relations, kind of. And I'm kind of wondering if you have like an audience in mind when you create your images, like for who are you creating those images? Because I think that like people from the global South who have experienced things that you portray in your images can relate to the images. And for example, like if you're from the global North, for them, there needs to be some kind of explanation. So I'm wondering like how you go about that.
So I mean, for me, when I create work, first I create it for myself, because there are things that I want to say and things that I don't want to keep inside of me that I need to put out there. So that's the first thing. The second, it's for my people. So for example, Ethiopians will see specific things in the work, because even though I speak English like this, I'm still an Ethiopian. So the heritage part is not easy to remove. And the third, it's, I think as photographers and as artists, we should never be creating work for somebody else, because again, it comes back to your own truth and your own honesty. And when you start making work for other people, then it's not authentically, it's not the same statement that you're making. So to me, when I started out, it was really to address the misrepresentation of not only Ethiopia, but also looking at the African diaspora, how we are misrepresented in the international media. This is how I started. And it was just out of that urgency. So if you look back at my interviews from like 2009, I'm still on the same path and on the same mission. And I think for any artist, any photographer, you have to have that mission deeply embedded in what you want to do. And that's how you know that you're in it for the right reasons. So I'm very happy and very blessed to have reached these levels. But I didn't start off by thinking, okay, I'm gonna be in the MoMA, or in the, I didn't, that wasn't my intention. I just felt like I had something to say and I need to be able to share it to whoever is willing to look at the work. So as it relates to the aesthetics of the work, what I always say is that the color is a seduction, so I'm seducing you with the color in, but then when you go behind the color, there's a lot of things inside. And that's the whole thing, is just to, make people curious to just even do a basic Google search who don't know nothing about Africa or don't know nothing about Ethiopia, to just make a search. And then that's a way to, connect people globally. And this is also one of the main reasons I do, Addis Photo Fest and also Africa Photo Fair. I don't organize, an African festival. I organize an international festival because I think for photographers from around the world, we have things that are in common than different. So how do we bring everybody together on the same page? Because at the end, we still have to deal with the system and we still have to deal with the market. And that means that if we're together, then we can actually move things forward because the conversation is the same and it comes back to authenticity.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yeah.
Ida, we are nearing us to the end. Can you give us a small spoiler? What's up next? What are you working on? Is there something? I think we can expect something something new and something which is really exciting.
First of all, I don't advertise what I'm doing next. No, it's okay. No, I mean, the first priority for me is the Africa Photo Fair. So I'm launching that in the second edition in November 5th. But the next thing for me is basically coming back to the analog of this conversation that actually happens on the paper. So I've been testing that for a couple of years now. And that's the thing is, to try to come back to the analog, it's very challenging in Africa because we don't have facilities and what have you. But that's what I've launched a couple pieces here and there just to see how it looks and how the audience reacts. But when I started out in high school in Canada, I started actually in painting, and it's only because the teacher showed us the darkroom that when I made my first print, I knew, okay, photography is the language that I want to stay in. So in a sense, I think I'm a frustrated painter, and that's why you see all these colors. But if I could draw and paint, trust me, that would be the world that I would enter in. But now I'm at a stage where, like, and there's one thing I've said before, I've spent many years of learning the rules, and this is what I tell students, you learn the rules and then you break the rules in photography. So I think that's where we have to head towards, we have to master it in order to break it and have a different conversation. So in everything that I do, it's basically breaking every rule. And that's the way I think that I'm able to express exactly what I want to say.
I believe that you are a fantastic teacher. Learning the rules to break them is very important. Okay, so thank you very much for being with us. And we will have a little break now, and then we start with the panel at 3 p.m. Thank you very much.
Your panel, we're not actually starting. I'm just... Clearly as you can, because otherwise we cannot hear you. And if you see faces that look like question marks, then just say it again, I guess. The audience can hear you well. Are we live already or not?
Yes.
Yes, are we? Okay. Well, welcome to this year's Hamburg Portfolio Review panel. Sorry for the delay. We had some technical issues, and we hope these are solved now. If you see question marks in our eyes, then this is again the technical issue. We'll hope everything works well. So, who am I? Who are my guests today? I'm Sebastian Schroeder, and I'm really happy to talk to you about AI and what's been going on in the past year with artificial intelligence in photography. And I'm not here alone. I'm here with Yvonne Tyne in the studio, and I have two guests who I cannot see right now online. There they are. Santiago Lyon from Adobe from New York, and Heinrich Holtgreve from Agentur Ostkreuz in Berlin. Thank you that you guys are here. Thank you in the audience that you're here. I'm really looking forward to this talk. And because it's always a question of introduction, we said, who is it going to do? Is it me or is it you? And we decided that the guests are going to introduce themselves because they know best what they actually do in the world. So, Santiago, I'll hand it over to you. Who are you? What are you doing? And yeah, let's see from there.
So, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name is Santiago Lyon. I work at Adobe, where I head up advocacy and education for something called the Content Authenticity Initiative, which is a large open source community of media and technology companies and others working to help address the problem of mis and disinformation. In a previous life, I was a journalist for most of my life, son of a journalist. I worked for 35 years, 20 years as a photographer in the field, including a decade spent covering war and conflict around the world, mainly for the Associated Press, and then almost 15 years as vice president for photography at the Associated Press, overseeing the entirety of the photo department there. So in some ways, the work that I'm doing now is a logical extension of my work as a journalist, but from a slightly different perspective. Very happy to be here, and I'll turn it over.
Thank you very much. Yvonne, who are you and why are you here today?
Yeah, I'm Yvonne Tyne. I'm a media artist based in Berlin. I'm working with AI since 3 years, so AI-based technologies. And I'm interested in the relationship between technology and the body, and how AI shaped this visual culture in these terms or in our time. And what I did is I trained some models, my own models, with stock photography of bodies, and developed works like videos. Mostly it's installations, so it's some videos. I made some sculptures by hand, which are inspired by the output of the AI, and I bring this all together in a room, also to challenge the digital and the real space, or kind of have a interaction between these different kind of medias. And yeah, my training was actually not with an open source platform, so I was also interested in how this technology will form a new body images without any way for me to interact in the algorithm of the AI. This is, for example, performance I did just recently, which is also kind of a hybrid between my real body, the body suit I made with AI based material, and yeah, I mix all this kind of media together, and there's overlapping between analog material, my handmade sculptures, and yeah, the images I generated with the AI.
Thank you very much. Very amazing work. I'm really looking forward to be talking about this later on. And then Heinrich, who are you and what are you doing in your life?
Hello, everybody, and sorry for that I couldn't make it to, where is it, Altona? So hello from St. Georg. I'm a photographer, basically. Yes, I spent the last decade or so mostly working in the journalistic fields and the editorial fields, and during the last 2-3 years, more and more other stuff came into my focus. For example, teaching. I teach at Ostkreuzschule Berlin, and will soon teach photography also in Bremen at the University of the Arts. And I do a little bit of lecturing on topics such as AI and technology and photography stuff. So this is what I do to make my living. And I also do things to express myself. You could call it free projects. And those are usually centered around also technological issues. For example, the internet. I'm interested in taking pictures of the internet, which I do like take pictures of cables or buildings or data centers. So the physical aspect of that. And that I'm also doing since almost a decade. And it became a long-term project. And these days I travel across the German border together with my friend Moritz Metz. He's a journalist at Deutschland Radio. He's a radio journalist. And that tour around the German border is our common project. It's called Internet Explorers. And the concept is that we visit every place where the German country is connected to the neighboring countries via fiber optic cables, and where those cables leave or enter our country. So we visit train bridges or bushes or seashores and very mundane places, and we take pictures there and record a podcast. And you can, of course, subscribe to it on every platform. It's called Internet Explorers. Thank you.
View. I'd like to have two brief introductions into the topics of AI. The first thing is, Santiago, you are working with Adobe on the Content Authenticity Initiative, and that is something fairly new. It's been going on for 4 years. 2019 is when you started. But I think most of people in our business still haven't heard about this, or many of them at least. So why don't you give us an overview on what your work is, what you do, and what you're trying to achieve with the Content Authenticity Initiative?
Sure. Can you see my screen?
Sure.
All right. So the Content Authenticity Initiative was started by Adobe in late 2019, really in response to the problem of mis and disinformation that we see in our lives every day. And since Adobe makes a lot of very powerful software that, when it falls into the wrong hands, can be used to spread mis and disinformation, we thought it was important to take on a leadership role to also address the problem. And so from the get-go, we wanted this to be an open source initiative. So all the work that we're doing is transparent and available for everybody, while at the same time being incorporated into some Adobe products. More recently, we've seen the phenomenon of AI-generated images. And what we're seeing in this space is that increasingly these images are becoming hyper-realistic and difficult to discern from quote-unquote real images, which has added impetus to our work. Our membership at the initiative has grown significantly since late 2019. On the left here, you can see some of the major media partners. From Germany, we have Axel Springer and DPA. And from around the world, we have major news agencies and consumer-facing organizations. And then you can see on the right some of the hardware and software partners we have. And we think it's precisely the size and makeup of this Content Authenticity Initiative community that will allow us to succeed. When we looked at the fight against mis and disinformation, we basically saw 4 areas that we think are important. Detection, which we're not involved in, which involves uploading files to programs that look for telltale signs of manipulation. The reason we're not involved in that on the Content Authenticity Initiative is because it's not scalable, it's not particularly accurate, and while it certainly can be useful, we're more focused on 3 other areas. Policy, which involves advising lawmakers and policymakers around the world about the state of technology and what's coming. Education, which involves media literacy and consumer literacy, explaining to people both in the classroom and consumers of media as to what's going on and best practices to navigate a complicated landscape. And at the top, of course, we have provenance, which is at the heart of the Content Authenticity Initiative. By provenance, we mean the basic trustworthy facts about the origins of a piece of digital content, whether it's an image, video, audio recording, or other, showing where it came from, what changes might have been made to it along its journey, and then sharing some or all of that information with the viewer. So this is the use case for photography. We start with capture. We're working with all the major camera companies and smartphone companies to get this technology into their devices at production, meaning in the not too distant future, when you go to buy a camera or a smartphone, it will come out of the box with this technology installed, and then you as the user can choose to turn it on or off depending on what the default setting is. What this does is secures the origins of the pictures from the beginning. It also secures all of the valuable EXIF and IPTC metadata that has very important information in it, but that is not particularly secure. Next, we move on to editing, integrating this technology into editing tools, both Adobe and non-Adobe tools, given the open source nature of the work. And here, any changes that you make to a file in the editing process get recorded and added to the file as a secure layer of metadata. Next, we're working with publishers and publishing systems to leave this metadata intact, because most metadata nowadays gets stripped off of files automatically. The reason that we're interested in leaving it intact is because then we can share some or all of it with the viewer through a clear and universal user experience. And so we call these secure layers of metadata content credentials. And they are visible at any point in a piece of content's journey to show where it came from and what might have happened to it. So that's the use case for photography, but there will be almost identical use cases for video, audio, and also for AI. Adobe recently got into the generative AI space with a product called Firefly, and all output from Firefly is very clearly labeled as such. In other words, when you create something on Firefly, embedded into the file is a content credential that says this was made with a machine. Additionally, we're seeing other major generative AI providers starting to label their output. So we're in conversations with the DALL-Es and the Stabilities and the Midjourneys, and all seem to want a layer of transparency. And so we're working with them towards that end. And then lastly, the other thing we're doing is facilitating the ability for creators to label their content "do not train," so that it can't be used in AI data training sets if they don't want to. Because as we know, these training sets are a source of some controversy, and there's a lot of legal cases going on about the way the training data was scraped and is being scraped to train these machines. So that's a really quick overview of the Content Authenticity Initiative. This QR code will take you to our website, contentauthenticity.org. And membership is free. Companies and individuals can join, and we welcome new members who are interested in this field, and I'll leave it at that.
And before we now go into an open discussion here, I want to ask Heinrich, can you please give us an overview? You're an expert on what's going on in the AI market specifically. Can you give us a brief overview of the different players that are in the market, and especially what their goals are and what their motivations are with developing these AI tools?
Sure. So there are basically all the major platform giants involved in this race. Some people might call it even an arms race. So there's Google with multiple AI ventures, the most popular one being Bard. Then there's Amazon. They're part in the game with, of course, Alexa, the voice-based assistant, but which is run on layers of AI and will in the future be even more AI-based, I read. But Amazon also, it's a little peculiar because Amazon is the internet, basically. Most data centers and most infrastructure is run by Amazon these days. Like, I don't know, it's a majority. So other companies use AWS, Amazon Web Services, as their basis to operate many messengers, many websites, many platforms, etc. So then we have Meta, the parent company by WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook and Threads. They are betting big on AI too. They are having multiple models, and the most infamous being Llama. Infamous because the first version was not so well received, and so they scrapped it and brought out another one, or are bringing out another one. And then there's Apple, which it's also a peculiar case because they are mostly in the hardware business. and they pride themselves in being the privacy-focusing company. And as we all know, Siri sucks. But it sucks for a reason, because Apple doesn't use that data mountains that Google and Amazon and Meta are hoarding. So yeah, but recent rumors suggest that Apple is also investing heavily into AI and generative AI. So those big platforms are betting big on it. And Microsoft, for example, how could I forget Microsoft? They've invested 11 billion into OpenAI. OpenAI is the company who is creating ChatGPT and Dolly and other tools. And Microsoft also incorporated ChatGPT into their Bing product. So there's a lot of intertwining going on. And then there's another hardware company, NVIDIA. It's the company who's also building or producing the building blocks used by AI and used by all AI companies, the graphics cards. When I grew up in the 90s, I was happy to hold the first NVIDIA graphics card in my hands for my gaming PC back in the day. But these days, NVIDIA is also the 8th largest company in the world right now, when you regard the market capitalization. And yes, of course, Adobe. Adobe is, I just checked, it's number 44 of the world's biggest companies right now. But Adobe, since announcing Firefly, is also a major player in the AI space. And its stock price also climbed significantly since doing so, I might add.
Thank you very much for this quick overview. And now I feel that everyone who is here has gotten the introduction that we need to actually go into depth, go into the interesting part is your opinions on what's going to happen, because this whole AI movement is so fresh and so new that many of us kind of feel lost by the speed that is overrunning us, more or less. Yvonne, you've been working with AI images for years, way longer than the public has, I guess. I think 3 years, you said, and for the most part, DALL-E, I think, and Stable Diffusion are out for about 1 year. Were you surprised by the intensity of the discussion that when these two came out, and then later when ChatGPT came out in January, were brought to the public?
Well, I think in the art world where I work, there were a lot of artists already exploring AI, but it was, of course, the access was more difficult. So they were not the main platforms. You could just make an account and then you just pay a little amount of money and you produce your own AI work. So mostly before you had to either have someone to program your model, or there were some platforms, but not for prompting. So yeah, I think it got really the public discussion began when it was kind of available for a really easy way, the access to just wait. I mean, DALL-E at the beginning, they had this waiting list. You had to sign and you had to wait a few weeks or depending. But yeah, I think then it got really like visible that these
Were you
systems.
surprised by the speed that the public interest grew, or did you expect that from the get-go?
I don't know if I'm really like, if I can say the public in general was interested, but of course the bubble of image producing and people are producing and are in the image world, working in this world, this was really fast. And then maybe with ChatGPT, it became a bit more public also to other people. They're not really involved in this kind of image production world. I don't know. No, I wasn't surprised. I think I was more surprised that the discussion began so late because I was already exploring it a little bit before. But of course, it was really like a small world at this time. But yeah.
How was it with you, Santiago? I mean, you were working on this for years, but you were working on authenticity and not on AI. Did that kind of overrun you, or did you expect that this would happen sooner or later from what you knew from the inside?
You know, Adobe, like a lot of big technology companies, has research labs who spend a lot of time and effort looking into new technologies. And so we had been seeing AI and how it was developing through what were called generative adversarial networks, which was sort of the precursor to the technology that we see now. So we were sort of aware of the capabilities of generative AI, but it was really, I think, the advent of DALI more recently, and the ability for these companies to scrape massive data training sets off of the internet in order to have a super high level of sophistication about what they could generate. Because in the past, it was more, creating artificial faces and things of that nature. So, not really surprised about the development of the technology. Perhaps a little bit surprised in terms of how fast it spread, in part because Stability.ai, who makes Stable Diffusion, chose to open source the underlying code, as I understand it, and that allowed for this to be adopted by a great many more companies and individuals. And now all of those companies, or many of those companies, are monetizing this. You pay a subscription to access the tools. So, technology is always progressing. I wasn't that surprised to see it head in the direction that it did.
Goal of your initiative changed somewhat, or is it actually just more important that the original goals are followed?
No, the goal of the initiative is the same. It's about transparency and being able to see the origins of digital files, where they came from, how they were manipulated, and then share some or all of that information with the consumer. What this has done has actually been quite beneficial to the Content Authenticity Initiative, because it's attracted a lot of attention. In other words, we were getting attention, our community was growing, we're making good progress on the technology front. And then in the last year or so, with the advent of generative AI, we've seen even more attention to our work, especially in the legislative space, where we're seeing, the European Parliament, the UK Parliament, the US Congress, national governments around the world, looking at how, from a legislative point of view, governments should address the phenomenon of generative AI, given the potential dangers that lurk. And so, we're busy on that slide I showed about the 4 pillars in the fight against disinformation. Policy was one of them. And so we're busy working with policymakers to help them understand what's going on. And we believe that the technology that underpins the Content Authenticity Initiative, which is based on a technological standard formed by a different group that we founded a couple of years ago that sits within the Linux Foundation, a group called the C2PA, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. That's the technical standard upon which all our work is based. And what we do is we take that technical standard and build open source tools with it. So the C2PA standard is also getting a lot of attention in addition to our implementation of that standard.
Sorry.
Please.
By the birth of the internet, it was in the 60s when machines could suddenly talk to each other across the USA, across the coasts. But it wasn't until, 30 years later, in the early 90s, where the web was invented. So the web as an application for the internet, like you sit in front of a computer, open a browser, go to a website, this is the web. Nowadays we use internet and web interchangeably, but the web is just one application of the internet, like email and messaging and so on. And I think with AI, it's a little bit the same. Like AI is a very old principle. It's also decades old. I think it's also born around the 60s. And Santiago is always using the term generative AI. And this is actually very important, because only the generative part is the new stuff. So prompting something, hitting enter, and receiving something out of it, that's the new wave of AI applications. But AI has been there for decades already, and doing other stuff like pattern recognition.
Something that I really want to address here, because if we've seen the image of the Pope at the beginning in your presentation, and we may have it here as well. This is something that's created a buzz in March when it came out, but then in the end, we were able to do this for at least 20 years, ever since Adobe brought out the first Photoshop. So I wasn't surprised that this would be coming, but I was surprised that it would create such a buzz. Santiago, do you think it's a good thing that these tools make the broad public question photography as a symbol of truth? So your aims can be reached easier, and we can all agree at some point now we can't trust images anymore. Isn't that actually a good thing?
You know, tools like generative AI, I think, are in some ways wonderful. They enhance creativity, they allow people to experiment with technology. I don't see any downside to these kind of tools. I think what's really important, though, is two things. In some cases, how these tools are used. And if they're used by actors who are, governments or other individuals or organizations who are attempting to mislead people with agenda-driven campaigns, then that's a little bit more worrisome, because what you're doing for a lot of people is creating things that are hyper-realistic, and people look at them and say, well, is that real or not? I have no idea. I'm supposed to be a somewhat of an expert in this area, given my background. And when I saw the picture of the Pope wearing the puffy coat, at first glance, I thought it was completely plausible, given the character of this particular Pope and given the reality or the apparent, real quality of the image. So, I think what we're focused in on is tool building. We're not passing judgment here as to how the tools should be used, but rather we see a benefit to using them to allow consumers to make their own judgments based on additional information that they have. That said, it's not a turnkey or a light switch solution by itself. The problem of mis and disinformation is very complex. It involves education, it involves government, it involves society, it involves, human behavior. But we think that the work that we're doing is important. And as to whether people can believe photography or not, sure, there are certain kinds of photography that are absolutely believable, based on where they come from, based on the source of the imagery. When you see images from the Associated Press or Reuters or DPA or Agence France Presse, or any number of consumer-facing organizations, you can be pretty sure, if not 100% sure, that those are real images, because there's a very robust system of checks and balances out there that ensure that. However, when you're, surfing social media and you see material and you're not sure where it came from, that's a little bit more problematic. And with the advent of these generative AI technologies that have really lowered the bar to access for this technology, anybody can, get this technology, type in a few prompts, and create a hyper-realistic image, and then put it on social media and say it was this or it was that. So I think what's really important here are the tools for transparency, but also this idea of media literacy, that people should check the sources of their imagery and do some due diligence. And not everybody's going to do that, or people are going to do that only about images that they really care about or topics that they care about. And that speaks to the broader issue of the intersection of photography and journalism and society as a whole.
If it wouldn't be a good idea to, first off, create the understanding that we shouldn't believe images at all in the first place. Yvonne, do you think, is it naive to think photography as a truth-telling medium?
We still trust it, no? If you make a passport, you need to have a biometric pass photo. So as Santiago said, I think there's many areas where we still can be really sure that this is trustful images. But I think I did a work more than 14 years ago, I think, where I already spoke about how we should request photographs, because there was the editing already existing and images were already edited. And I think it's a bit surprising that now the big discussion about trusting photographs is developing and not already much longer, because I think this problem of yeah, you can edit with good software, with Photoshop, since many years. So I think maybe what's the difference now is that you don't need to have any kind of knowledge or skills in photography and to know how to work with Photoshop anymore, because you just need to know to describe a picture, like making a good description as a prompt, and then you get easy, like it's really quick and fast to get a good generated hyper-realistic image. And maybe that's the difference. So what Santiago said is like everyone now can produce images with their own truth. So this is maybe the difference to the time before AI.
Heinrich, if you think about what Santiago and the whole initiative want to achieve, that to me it sounds very much like a very good solution, but at the same time I'm a little bit afraid that we are maybe with images going into the same direction as we are with cookie banners at some point, because what we wanted to achieve is that we have more data security of and know what's happening around us in the internet. And now we're kind of stuck with a cookie banner on every website. It's kind of destroying the experience a lot. And what I'm wondering, what's your take on if we're looking at images, and every image will have the metadata applied, and we have overlays that show us all the different steps that an image has gone through. Do you think this is something that we should expect when we're looking at the initiative and the goals of the initiative?
I'm a big fan of the CAI, and my agency Oscrit is also a member, and I think it's the best there is right now. I mean, it's a good effort. It's probably even the best effort I can see right now in the industry. However, as you also talked about the truth or the inherent truth of photography, I like the German term Wahrheitsversprechen, so it's the promise of truth. And yeah, I think in all photography, be it commercial or advertisement photography, and even journalistic photography, it can only be and always be a promise of truth, because there's so much subjectivity involved in the whole chain. Like me, the photographer, I grew up in a certain place with certain values at a certain time. I have my own filters and I take my picture, and you can call it subjectivity in a word. And it's a good thing. We should cherish it, but we should also keep an eye out on our industry, because our industry, like when we look at the numbers and the economy, like the economical terms of the journalistic industry, it sucks. It's in shambles. You know, nobody has money for anything. So it's important to not only hire one photographer but multiple photographers. So multiple subjectivities can create like a rainbow of truth, promises of truths. And I think as an industry, it's super important to try to maintain that multiple angled viewpoints. And yeah, I think the CAI is a good effort. However, the real, like the end boss, I think, is the social media space, because there's the Wild West, and there's no checks and balances, and no editors, no specialized documentation apparatus like in Die Zeit or Der Spiegel. They have people just working on fact checking, and of course nobody does it on social media. And I wonder if Santiago could shed some light on if there are any planned or secret, or if maybe under wraps still, but if there are any talks within Adobe and the social, or the CAI and the social media companies.
Yeah, no, we're in conversation with all of the major social media companies to explain what we're doing. And there is certainly some interest. But then there's another methodology here that we're also developing that involves invisible watermarking. So this is the notion that when you create a content credential, when you create the credential, it adds an invisible watermark, what's called a steganographic watermark, to the file. And that invisible watermark accompanies the file. And then through the use of, or the development of a browser plugin, we can then use the browser plugin to detect whether an image has an invisible watermark. And then we can use that invisible watermark to link it back to the content credential that was originally created for it, regardless as to whether the content credential has actually accompanied the file. And so this allows us to check the provenance of images on social media without getting the social media companies involved, because it's through your browser. And so we're very close to, rolling this technology out. Of course, it's slightly complicated in the sense that it requires the user to install the plugin until such time as the browser companies put it on by default. But it's a good complement to the approach that I outlined before that was based on the secure metadata accompanying the file. So I think, one way or the other, we'll get to the ability for people to see the provenance of files. Then over time, when we think about what success looks like, it's really about ubiquity and this notion that if we reach a critical mass of content that has content credentials on it, then the content that does not have content credentials on it stands out precisely because of their absence, and would encourage people to take a closer look at it. But again, that's also dependent on consumer education, media literacy, and to some degree legislation. So it's all pieces of a puzzle.
When we're staying there, Heinrich, if an online outlet like Zeit, Spiegel, New York Times, or other outlets report with breaking news, it's always images of the moment, which is fine. But then when we're talking about science topics, education, philosophy, or comparable topics, they often use stock images to illustrate the article or the topic of the article. Is it a problem if they used AI-generated images instead of that stock imagery?
My short answer would be it's not a problem if they used generated imagery if they label it as such. And broader speaking, I think illustrations or illustrative images taken by camera or by a generative tool, whatever, I think they are becoming more commonplace. And my personal theory is that it's harder to research those topics, those intangible topics, like, I don't know, what did you give an example? Science or health or...
How do I bring up my child and all that kind of stuff, like educational, motherhood, family types of topics.
And of course, at some point, I think it's just economical to say, come on, let's stop the search and let's generate something. I think it's also, an economical topic, like the image boards or the image editorial teams are shrinking. So there's less time for research, I think, not at every outlet, but at the broader strokes of the industry are like this. So I think the temptation will even rise in the coming months and years to stop research of existing material or even commission new material by photographers and to just use generative material. I think that might be the trend, yes.
Yvonne, you're doing generated work, and in the last couple of days I've talked to a lot of journalists, editing people, and photographers, and some of the talks came to the conclusion that if picture desks would use generated images, that would probably be the end of stock imagery. But then at the same time, the editors don't have the time to create the work themselves. Do you think it would be sufficient or a good idea to implement new business models also for artists to say we're the ones who take the time to create those stock generated images for journalist topics like education, all that. So we basically we're creating the new stuff, but we can do it way cheaper, and we can at the same time kind of bring out our artistic views to the world.
Well, I'm not sure if I understood the question in the right way, but I think right now we are still training these AIs with real material, of real photographs, and if these photographs are not taken anymore because it's cheaper to generate them, then of course the generated image of generated images will explore. So it's going to be a generated image. So I was wondering what that makes to the real image. Maybe it's getting more hyper real, or it doesn't even look like a real photograph anymore. I mean, it's really something. I don't know if it would be better to generate instead of having these stock agencies. But I agree with Heinrich because it's I think it's a question of money in the world of media, especially magazines in paper. They almost not existing anymore. Like they get less money. Lots of these kind of medias just exist digitally, and I think it would be nice to have still photography, real photographs taken by a camera. So maybe it's also going in the other direction at the end, because everything is generated. People start to go back to the real, like, analog photograph. So because you see that in art, that or like the young generation, young people already explore like analog film, and they never grew up with it. But I think maybe it can be even the opposite effect. But I think in the commercial part, it's possible that at the end it's stock photography will be not existing anymore. But I don't know. I'm more like an artist, so I think it's like I'm thinking about these questions, of course, because I'm really know a lot of photographers, but I don't know what these technologies will change. Of course, it's more. I guess it would be really sad not having real
Images
taken
anymore.
photographs by a camera at the lens. And also, what's totally missing is the interaction between the people. No, like if you want to take a portrait, you still have interaction between the photographer and the person. So people were just sitting in front of the computer and generating prompts to generate pictures. So maybe also this is not what producers would like to do. So I don't know.
What I wondered, I mean, the whole process is, we're always talking digitally. But then just recently, it was exposed that the Boda Group here in Germany, it's one of the biggest publishing houses, has released a food magazine that was created, or all images were fully created on generative AI, and they were exposed because they didn't mark those images as being generated, and there was a huge shitstorm about it. Santiago, are there any plans on how the CAI is going to handle print as well, or are you just going to try to figure out a way how to do it digitally?
Well, the main focus, of course, is digital, because that allows for much, deeper sort of investigation or analysis of things because of their digital nature. Print could conceivably be done, but it would need some kind of digital interface, maybe a QR code that, takes a look at the image and combined with image recognition software. I don't know. We're not focused on print right now, in part because as a percentage of the overall media landscape, it's quite small. But I think eventually there'll probably be a way to establish the provenance of print publications, but it will be dependent on publishers creating some kind of digital link that will allow somebody to then analyze the image online.
Think about this. If, for example, the CAI standard would become a standard, a mandatory for picture desks around the world, would you see as the end of stock photography?
Not necessarily. I mean, stock photography is, you know, a massive industry. It's a much bigger part of photography than, say, editorial photography. And the sheer volume of stock photography that's being produced every year is huge. I mean, if you think the news agencies like AP and Reuters and AFP are more or less distributing 1 million pictures a year, about 3,000 pictures every 24 hours. The stock photography imagery, each agency of the big agencies is processing 1 million pictures a week. And so it's a massive collection of imagery. The issue with stock photography has often been around search. With so many images there, how do you find the images that you need? And so when you think about generative AI as a tool, you know, you can think about it in many ways. You can either go just with the output of the generative AI itself, or you can use it as a sort of a co-pilot and combine it with existing stock photography to create whatever it is you need created. And I think, you know, I would say one of the most important things now as we continue down this exciting digital world journey is this notion of transparency. Like, people should be able to create whatever they want. I have no issue with that. But there should be, in my view, some level of transparency so that the viewer can look at something and say, oh, look, this is a quote unquote real image, or this is a real image that was enhanced with AI, or this is an entirely AI image, or any combination of those things. So it's really about allowing people to see where something comes from, and then they can make choices as to whether they want to look at that information or pay attention to it or whatever the case might be.
Very much. I would like to move on to the last big topic on this AI panel, which is copywriting. I think this is one of the major issues that is to be addressed, I'm afraid, probably through courts and not through most of the discussions that we have, but still I want to talk about this. There are two types of copyrights that we have to distinguish to understand the issue. The one is the input and the other one is the output. So the input means there are many images that are put into learning models, and then there's something coming out on the other end. And is it allowed for companies to use these images legally without paying royalties to the people who have made these images? And then on the output, it means that the images that are created through generative AI have a copyright of the person who has prompted. So these are the two copyrights that we're talking about. Heinrich, what do you think when we're talking about outputs, so the images that are coming out of generative AI, should these images have a copyright of the person that has put in the prompt?
It depends. Depends which model you're using. If you're using Dolly or Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or Adobe Firefly. Shout out to Santiago's company, Adobe. They did the right thing. They trained Firefly only on, or mostly on, available Adobe stock imagery, which was already cleared, if I understand correctly, and also public domain images. So that's also the reason why Adobe, I think 4 days ago, they released the newest batch of Creative Cloud applications. And since a couple of days, you can officially use those Firefly elements in a commercial field, meaning, or I read it as, you could publish them because the rights are cleared. But other image generators like Midjourney or OpenAI's Dolly, they're like big vacuums. They hoovered the whole internet, and everybody's images were like included, and they even hoovered piles of data that already hoovered the internet. So the big scraping project. Anyway, so my criticism towards these companies is they didn't really care about copyright in the first place. All they cared about was training their models, no matter what. And now, after the fact, they offer the creative industry to opt out. But I would rather have had the opportunity to opt in, like to, yes, I agree, my material can be used, and not automatically have it used and then I have to become active and actively opt out and have it taken out. But again, that's in German I would say verschüttete Milch, so that's spilled milk. And what was the question? Should they be copyrighted? And the answer is I don't really know. I'm really at a loss here. I think, especially as long as the generated material relies on stolen material, it should definitely not be copyrightable, because then it would be some sort of laundering, I would say, creating generated images through a machine on the basis of stolen material shouldn't be eligible to copyright, I would say. But in the case of Firefly, where it's already cleared, maybe yes, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's not really easy to answer this question. For me, I mean, prompting, you could see already as a creative process, no? But of course, if the training is using all the image material, you can imagine it's really not totally clear. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to say, like, if you change the image, the output, and make something out of it, like I do it. So I make videos, I'm doing different kind, I'm also not prompting, but so I'm training, it's a different thing because I use my own material. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, then
I'm not. I think it's maybe it's on the time to speak about it, but I think it's really hard to already answer this question because I'm a fan of a copyright. I think it's important to have it. So because there was also discussion about no copyrights anymore, I think it's still need to be copyrights on text and image and artworks and so on, music. But I think there's the same problem in all these kind of fields right now because it's all involved in AI. So music has the same problem, the music industry and so on. So I think this is, yeah, I think for sure if it's a commercial use, so for example, then I would say you have to be clear. It has to be clear that it's your work. So maybe there's something in Adobe you can kind of filter with the AI if this kind of work is already existing in the world and someone holds a copyright. And I mean, maybe it's possible with an AI technology to find out. Yeah.
So use AI to discover AI.
To say now, no, this like Roger Bellin, you generate an image looks like Roger Bellin. So the AI says, no, but you can't hold the copyright on this work because there's Roger Bellin, famous photography, already holding the copyright to works. They look really the same. So I don't know. This could be maybe a solution to ensure that this is really your work.
I mean, are you afraid as an artist that you might lose the uniqueness of your art? Because as it seems, there are courts that are in favor of deciding that when these images are scraped and they're afterwards refined a little bit, then it is illegal to use them without appropriation of the original creator. So that could mean people would be able to create images in your style and then sell them, which would be totally legal. Are you afraid that you might lose basically your own style for something commercial from others?
Well, I think this already happened to me 8 years ago when someone took pictures in the really exactly same way as I did. And we had a copyright discussion about this work because I could prove that this work was already exhibited in a museum. So that was clear this was existing before. So I think in this way, the way I work, I think I'm not really worried about that because I'm really using it in a really, I mean, experimental way, and I think it's really difficult to copy. I mean, it's not possible, but and even then, as an artist, I think it's easier maybe because you exhibit the work, you maybe publish somewhere in a book, maybe as a commercial photographer as well, because you have still kind of proofs that this work was existing with the data, or I don't know, we just heard that the metadata is not so trustful, so maybe this tool of Adobe will help also to regulate that, because there was also this opt-in, can I be trained or not? There's also a website existing. It's called Have I Been Trained? I think it's a art project where you can just type in your name and you know if your material was part of training of an AI. So I think it's yeah. I'm personally not worried, but I can imagine that some artists, photographers are worried if they have a really unique style, and yeah, you just say prompt that you want to have this style, of course.
And this would be legal. That's the
well,
main thing.
I think I don't know if it's. I mean, maybe the
way the courts decide it might actually might be able to happen. But then let's take this over to Santiago, because in the US, where you are situated, a couple of lower courts have already decided that copyright will not be granted to images that are purely created by AI. But once you add something afterwards, then it might. This is still open for discussion. But then at the same time, the famous British law firm Clifford Chance has put out a paper saying, well, in the UK, this might be different. So this actually might get a copyright, even if it's just created by AI, because the law is different. And the same goes for the EU. So what do you think? What will happen to the market when there are different kinds of regulations in a market that is at its core digital?
It's a good question. I mean, we have to remember that these copyright laws were created quite some time ago, before much of the technology that we're talking about today was even invented. And as you indicated, courts here in the US have thus far said that generative AI content is not copyrightable, because one of the basic definitions for copyright is that it needs to be created by a human being. The output, the thing that you're copywriting, needs to be created by a person. So that gets to what was mentioned earlier about, well, if I do a very highly sophisticated prompt and my machine gives me an output, a result based on my prompt, is that sufficient human intervention? Right now, the courts are saying no, but at the same time, the Copyright Office here in the United States has been and is conducting what they call a listening tour, where they are going around talking to a broad cross-section of, lawyers, technologists, creatives, publishers, etc., to get additional information that will inform any maybe future adjustments to copyright law. But it usually takes a little bit of time for legislation to catch up with technology. The question is going to be, how long is it going to take in this particular case? And then there are all the nuances where, I have an image that maybe was a quote unquote real image, and I altered it with generative AI, and then I did something else to it afterwards. And so, unpacking all of that, I think, is going to be complicated. So I don't know what the outcome will be, but I guess we'll see.
Well, I would like to open the room for questions of the auditorium, because we're coming towards the end of our time here. Do you guys have any questions to any of our guests about AI? Okay, this doesn't seem like it. So I have one last question for Heinrich, and then I would think we would wrap up this year's edition of the Hamburg Portfolio Review. But Heinrich, it's a little bit, well, let's how to put it. The former spouse of Elon Musk, Claire Boucher, who goes by the name Grimes, she's a musician, and she has put up a synthetic voice of herself, a synthetic version, and she allowed everyone to create their own music with that voice, and says, you can use it, you can publish it, as long as I get attributed and get 50% of the royalties that come out of that music. Do you think this could be a revenue model for artistic photographers to say, well, you know what, Yvonne, here you go, this is my style, you can use it, and whatever you make out of it, I get 50% of it. Would that be something that you would be willing to do?
I can't shut off the part of my brain that's asking the question, who is going to control it and who's going to manage the banking side and the accounting side. But yeah, it would be nice, but it's incredibly naive, I think. And it's, in her case, in Grimes's case, I think it's more of a marketing move, because it was this bold idea, and of course she's the star and she can do it, maybe, and maybe it will work out. But I think short term it was raised awareness for her brand. But I mean, in photography in Germany, we have the VG Bildkunst, and since years they can't get their shit together with the accounting software. So I don't have high hopes that they can manage to send me the 50% of my cut in the future. I don't know. I'm pessimistic regarding that.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this talk. And by that, I would probably say it shouldn't be me to conclude this year's edition of the Hamburg Portfolio Review, but Andreas, who is taking up with us all for the past 3 days as the lone survivor of the sickness around here in Hamburg, as Heike and Lars are unavailable, have been unavailable in the past 2 days. So thank you very much for listening. And then I would ask Andreas to close this whole thing off, I guess.
So thank you, Sebastian, for this talk, and thank you, Yvonne and Santiago and Heinrich, for joining us for this very interesting discussion about a lot of details and topics which we don't know yet. Maybe we find out in the near future. Thank you for everybody out there for joining, for listening to us, to take part in reviews. To give a review, we had now 3 full days of lectures, panels, portfolio reviews, and we had a party yesterday night. It was also very nice. And I think, I hope we see you all next year for Hamburg Portfolio, the 4th edition. And I'm very happy about this community we are living in, and to work with you all, and this was really great. So thank you so much, and feedback is always will be always good, because then we can find out how can we improve, what can we make better, and which mistakes can we avoid for next year's edition. And so that would be always great. So thank you so much, and take care, and see you next year.
Okay.